Okay, so you know that feeling of knowing you've got a safety net. That no matter what crazy thing life throws your way, you're ready for it. Well, that peace of mind, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're talking emergency funds. And you, my friend, you've been doing your homework. You've got articles bookmarked, notes scribbled down, even a PDF or two open on your computer. So clearly, you're serious about this. And guess what? I've got just the person to help us break it all down. We're joined by someone who really knows their stuff when it comes to navigating the world of personal finance. They're here to help connect the dots between all your research and maybe even uncover some insights you haven't even considered yet. Ready to dive in. Now, I know you've been doing your research, but before we get into all the nitty-gritty, when you hear emergency fund, what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
It's funny you use the word mind because honestly, I think this whole thing is as much about psychology as it is about actual money. You know, one of your sources even calls it a reserve fund. And I really like that because it really highlights that sense of having reserves, right? That psychological safety net, knowing you've got backup if things go sideways.
Reserve fund. I like that. It's like having an extra stash of confidence, you know what I mean? But speaking of things going sideways, emergencies. How are we defining emergency here? I mean, we're not talking about a spontaneous shoe shopping spree, are we?
Right. We're talking about those unexpected things that just pop up and demand your immediate financial attention. Things like surprise medical bills or your car deciding to break down. Those oh no moments that, let's be honest, happen to the best of us.
Okay, so those unexpected and often stressful costs that you just can't ignore. That makes sense. One article you highlighted even mentioned job loss, which, let's be real, that's a whole other level of oh no.
Absolutely. And that's where having an emergency fund, having that financial cushion to fall back on can truly make all the difference. As your research pointed out, it's not just about the money itself, it's about reducing stress and helping you make clearer decisions during a time that's already pretty overwhelming.
Okay, stress reduction, clearer thinking, I'm sold. Sign me up. But here's the $1 million question, or maybe slightly less than $1 million question, depending on your situation. How much do we actually need in this financial safety net of ours? Because that whole 3 to 6 months of living expenses thing gets thrown around a lot. And honestly, it can be a little intimidating.
Yeah, I get it. That 3-6 month guideline can feel pretty overwhelming, especially if you're just starting to think about all this. But here's the thing. It's not one size fits all, right? Your research actually does a good job of digging into the factors that should influence this magic number.
Okay, so less about magic, more about personalization then. What kind of factors are we talking about here?
Well, job security is a biggie. I mean, one of your notes even mentioned that, right? It's one thing if you're in a stable industry with that consistent paycheck coming in. But if your income is all over the place, well, you might need a bigger cushion to really feel secure.
Right, so a freelancer who's hustling for gigs every month might want a bigger emergency fund than someone with a steady 9 to 5. Make sense? What else should we be thinking about?
Family size is another big one. You're not just supporting yourself, right? Kids, a partner, whoever it is, that all factors in. More people usually means more expenses, so naturally you'd need a larger emergency fund to cover those too.
Yeah.
And of course you've also got those more individual things, right? Health conditions, dependents, those kind of things can all play a role.
Gotcha. So it's less about hitting this arbitrary number and more about taking a good, hard look in the mirror, right? What's going on in your own life? What are your needs? What does your financial situation actually look like?
Exactly. It's about making sure you've got the right size safety net for your own unique circumstances. And hey, if you're just getting started, even a smaller goal can be a huge win. Like one of those articles mentioned, aiming for $1,000 in 3 months, that's a fantastic start.
Love it. Progress, not perfection. Am I right? Okay. So we've covered the what and the why of an emergency fund. We know it counts as an emergency. We've thought about our own individual needs. But now let's talk about actually making this happen. How do we build this thing? Because, and I'm just being honest here, when I look at my bank account balance right now, that whole 3-6 month goal feels a little ambitious, let's say.
Totally. Building an emergency fund doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. In fact, you know what? One of your sources does a really good job of breaking it down into these totally doable steps. Seriously, they're surprisingly manageable.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Lay it on me. What are these magical, manageable steps?
So, first things first, we got to outsmart our own brains, you know? We're all about that future discipline when it comes to saving money. We're all, oh yeah, I'll totally transfer that money later.
Oh, 100%. Guilty as charged. I'm transferring that money later. Spoiler alert, I did not transfer that money later.
Exactly. And that's where automation comes in. One of your articles nailed it on this. Setting up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your savings, even if it's a small amount at first, it's like magic. Because then you don't even have to think about it, it just happens.
Like setting and forgetting it, right? Just like those automatic payments for rent or whatever. That money's going straight to my emergency fund before I even have a chance to spend it on something else.
Exactly. You're basically paying yourself first, which is always a good strategy. But of course, for those automatic transfers to really work their magic, we got to make sure there's money in the checking account to begin with, right?
Okay, so this is where the whole cut back on unnecessary expenses advice comes in. So no more daily lattes for me then. Yeah.
Hey, if the latte makes you happy, we can find other ways to trim the budget. It's not about cutting out all the fun stuff, it's about being more mindful. What if one of your sources call it, oh yeah, financial leaks? Those little sneaky expenses that add up without you even realizing it.
Oh, tell me about it. I swear, those little expenses are like ninjas. They just disappear with your money before you even know what hit you.
Exactly. So instead of, completely depriving yourself, maybe take a look at those recurring subscriptions you barely use. Or those impulse buys online that somehow end up at your doorstep. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Okay, ouch. Those online shopping carts can be dangerous, I'll give you that. All right, so no drastic cuts, but definitely being more aware of where the money's going and plugging those financial leaks you were talking about. Smart. But let's be real. Even with a fully funded emergency fund, actually having to use it, it's almost like, I don't know, is it bad that it feels a little bit like admitting defeat?
I totally get it. It's like this weird mental thing. You spend all this time building up this safety net and then boom, you need it. But honestly, here's the thing. Using your emergency fund isn't a failure, it's a success story waiting to happen. It means you planned ahead, you were proactive, and now you've got this resource to help you navigate a tricky situation.
Okay, I like the way you think. It's not giving up. It's like high-fiving my past self for being so responsible. But even still, I think there's this fear, right? That fear of draining the account, having to start from zero again.
Totally. But instead of starting over, what if we thought of it more like refilling? Remember those strategies we talked about? Automating those savings, being mindful of our spending, maybe even picking up a side hustle here and there. All that still applies when you're rebuilding your emergency fund.
So it's not about being bummed that we had to use some of the money. It's about getting right back on that horse. We've done it before. We can do it again.
Exactly. And honestly, you're in an even stronger position now because you've seen firsthand how valuable that emergency fund can be. You've lived it. That's some powerful motivation right there. Oh, and speaking of important things to remember, we should probably touch upon liquidity before we wrap things up.
Liquidity. Okay,
Yeah.
For those of us who haven't taken Finance 101, what does that even mean?
It basically boils down to how easy it is to actually get to your money when you need it, right? You don't want your emergency fund tied up in some long-term investment where it takes weeks to access the cash.
So maybe not that giant novelty check I was planning on using to store my emergency fund.
Probably a good call. Your research actually had it right. A high-yield savings account is usually the way to go here. Easy to access, plus you get a slightly better interest rate compared to a traditional savings account, so your money's working a little harder for you.
Perfect. High yield savings account it is. Easy access, earning a little interest. Love it. But real talk for a second. How do we resist the urge to dip into that account for, shall we say, non-emergency purposes? Because sometimes that emergency fund starts looking a lot like a new phone fund or a weekend getaway fund.
Oh, I've been there. That instant gratification is a powerful force, right? One trick I like to use, and this came up in your research, is visualizing your goals. Like, picture yourself breezing through a car repair without stressing about how to pay for it, all because you have that emergency fund ready to go. That sense of relief, that feeling of being in control, that's what you're working towards.
Okay, yeah. You're right. It's not about denying myself a little treat today. It's about prioritizing my future peace of mind.
Exactly. Think of it as investing in your future self, setting yourself up for financial success in the long run. And hey, just remember, this whole journey to a more financially sound you is a marathon, not a sprint, right? It's about the small choices we make every day that add up to big results over time.
Love that. A financial marathon. And like any marathon, you've got to make sure you've got the right shoes, stay hydrated, and maybe have a friend on hand who can give you a pep talk when you need it. At least help you balance your checkbook, right?
You're on a roll with these analogies. I like it.
Well, there you have it, folks. We covered it all, the what, the why, and the how of building, using, and yes, even rebuilding that so important emergency fund. But maybe even more importantly than that, we've learned that it's about more than just the money itself, isn't it? It's about the peace of mind, the freedom, knowing you've got this secret weapon in your back pocket, ready to take on whatever life throws your way. So, as you continue on your own financial journey, remember this. You don't have to have it all figured out today. Take it one step at a time, celebrate the wins, and never underestimate the power of those small but mighty consistent actions. That's all from us for today's deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep those eyes on the prize. You got this.